Welcome again to the Unlearning Curve. It's a space where we wrestle through issues of religion, deconstruction, mental health, politics, whatever the hell else is going on in our minds. We kind of talk about it on a random basis when we sit down together. Joining me always is Karl the Great. J.D. Forehand will be joining us from across the world. He'll pop in at some point during this. I'm Stuart Delony, and joining us also today is Bob Miner. So, Karl, you want to give us an introduction of Bob?
Yeah, like I said last month, Laura and I have been hanging out on the edge of Christianity for 10 years, about a decade now. And we kind of see that maybe it's like Lucy and Charlie Brown has her little booth, you know. And for a brief moment, we tried to market ourselves, but then realized we need to heal. But we hang out at that little spot, and you might think of the desert, fathers and mothers or whatever. It's just a place, a community. And we see people go by, and some of them are wise, some of them are not. And we see people, you know, foolishly kind of jumping into things out of Christianity and trying to start something new again, and then they have to deal with their mental health like I did. And, you know, after a while, you just notice kind of the wise people going by. And that's who I want to talk to, and that's who I tend to gravitate towards. And so Bob was one of those people that we've had on our podcast several times. And Bob is a former professor, may still be. I'm going to let him do the bio. But he works with something called the Fairness Project. And he has a lot of wisdom in world religions and things like that. So some of the things that we suppose and postulate about, he could probably clear up for us. That's why he's here. Bob, welcome to the podcast, and introduce yourself.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Let's see, without sound like I'm bragging. Anyway, my official title is Professor Emeritus at the University of Kansas. I taught there for 35 years, was chair of the department for 6 in religious studies, and I'm a historian of religion. Tends to be what I write and speak about is more cultural criticism, how religion fits into that or doesn't, or it gets used. My view is religion is used by people. And so I usually don't get into arguments about religion, but I get into discussions about why do you use it that way? Because people use the same books, the same institutions, the same everything differently. You know, there's a Martin Luther King Jr. with the Bible, and then there's a Jerry Falwell with the Bible. So So I'm interested in that, and then that's why my last book was called When Religion is an Addiction. And again, that's my interest. I do a lot of work with PFLAG, speak nationally at their conferences and also to small groups and things like that. And I have done a lot of stuff since at the end of my career at the university. I was not only teaching Asian religions, which was my specialty. And by the way, J.D. might be interested in knowing that I lived for a summer in Taiwan. But anyway, it's actually in Taipei, but then traveled all around. Anyway, no, that's enough. And my field was India. You know, I know enough about the history of religions that I don't have to defend anything. Just try to understand it and to know the good and the bad that people have done in the name of religion. And all of them. There's none that's, that's not guilty in some ways. And I've written 8 books, and most of them are on India and India religion's relationship to culture, law, stuff like that. And then this last one I said was because I always like to ask why. And so when I wrote in 2001 a book called Scared Straight, Why It's So Hard to Accept Gay People, Why It's So Hard to Be Human, I wanted to know why people were stuck on this issue. And because the science was settled, even religious leaders were given different interpretations of everything. So it's like, I wanted to know, for example, there are what they call clobber verses people use against gay people. And you know, I know that in the last half a century, at least, if not longer, there have been at least 5 or 6 interpretations of all those verses. Since every time we use scripture, we interpret it. No one takes it literally. And I want to know why the one interpretation, which is anti-LGBTQ people tends to be the popular one. And that's why I wrote that. And then the whole point was it's about gender. It wasn't about gender roles and all the things feminists have been talking about. Anyway, that started the Fairness Project, which is a project to help other organizations at what they need with resources, booklets that I produce, and speakers and stuff like that. But it's not an organization you join. Is not an official nonprofit. It doesn't make a profit. In fact, I usually lose money. My goal here isn't to make money.
Yeah.
It's to get messages out. And so that's kind of what I do. And I still do a lot of speaking for local groups and stuff like that. And, continue to lose money. And that's fine. I'm not, it's my tithing, I guess.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's what you want to know or if there's anything else. I'm married. Like I said, I live in Kansas City, Kansas. And with my husband, we've been married, we've been together since 2000. And a grandparent who has a grandson that we love and all that. And that's just normal kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, Bob, what about your religious background growing up? Because, you're this person that is you analyze religion, you look at it, you've looked at it from all these other angles, and I know so many of us have grown up in this where we're just force-fed a worldview. So what started your questions? What started you poking the bears or pulling threads?
It's a dull story. I'll try to make it interesting. My parents would take us to whatever was the closest church, drop us off for Sunday school, pick us up. And my mom would say, religion's okay, but don't get too excited about it. And so my field was chemistry. And I was always inspired by teachers. I don't think I could learn online. I need a person there who embodies an ideal. And so my high school teacher was a chemistry teacher. I went into chemistry. I started at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. I grew up in Milwaukee area. I'm a city boy. And I took a sociology course, and the section on sociology religion inspired me so much that I switched. But then at that time, UWM didn't have religion courses, so I went to a school called Trinity College in northern Chicago because it was convenient. They gave me scholarships and stuff like that. I didn't realize it was tied to a church called the Evangelical Free Church, which the Swedish covenant tradition, that's a lot of weeds. And when I went there, it was quite liberal. And so I got a BA in Biblical Studies, an MA in Biblical Studies with an emphasis in Near Eastern archaeology. Since I left, the church cracked down at it, sort of like the Baptists cracked down on everything for getting too liberal, because they would say things like, well, don't we believe in taking the Bible as the Word of God? And the Greek professor would say, well, there are a lot of different ways you could take that. So that was not how the church. So they cracked down. So within a year or two, none of the professors I had were still there.
Yeah.
So then I moved. I wanted to get my PhD at a university, state university, which is, and at that time, the University of Iowa had the oldest PhD in religious studies, because I didn't want it affected by a doctrine and ideology and that kind of pressure. And so I went there and started in biblical studies, but my inspiration field was religion in India and religious studies methodology, how to do history of religions. And so that's what I switched with. So then my field was religion in India. And then, so that's how I got here. And I've had, I've experienced churches. We used to do, as a bunch of guys, we would go to a kind of a fundamentalist and usually a Pentecostal type church to go to, sit in the back row, and actually we were kind of making fun of it. So we were suspicious, and it was always, that's when the pastor always turned the sermon into, you got to have a second work of grace or something like that. Oh man, I can tell you something. Can I tell you a funny story about that? Is that all right? We could get off here.
No.
We were at one of their evening services that I think was First Pentecostal. It was the old kind of Pentecostal.
Holiness.
And at the end, of course, they were all speaking in things we don't understand, and neither did they. And they would go wild. And one woman, the aisles were pitched down toward the altar, and one fairly big-sized woman was running around waving her a handkerchief and going up and down the aisles. And she came down one of the aisles so fast that she flipped over the, I guess they called it the altar rail or the rail. And her bottom end was facing now the congregation, and her dress, she had one of those kind of old-fashioned dresses, flipped up so you could see garters and everything, and she was mooning the congregation, through this. And so one of the deacons I saw in the front row got up and was trying to kind of pull her dress down or something like that. And the pastor from the pulpit couldn't see exactly what's happened. And he said, no, brother, let her glory shine.
Did he lay hands on it?
He didn't.
Okay.
Can you imagine
That would have been
what
sexual assault, I guess. But yeah.
us about five guys in the back row who were laughing anyway thought about that. So I had off and on thing. I took it seriously. I didn't, but I always was, isn't this interesting? Was kind of a lot of it. So I know enough of fundamentalism in most religions to be dangerous.
Now, would you say, like in most religions, when we and whatever religion is, once you move towards fundamentalism, things get fucked up? Is that fair?
I think it is. I think it's the extreme right wing in those religions. We're seeing that in India, for example, with Modi, and Rao. The current prime minister is trying to turn it into a Hindu state. And we're seeing that, of course, in the United States, we've got all this use of religion by the repubs. We see it in Islam. We see it in others. It's definitely what we call nationalism. And I don't call it Christian nationalism because I don't think it represents anything like that. I call it sectarian religious nationalism. We're seeing that in a lot of places. And yet, I once wrote an article called, Why Does Religion Keep Us from Seeing Our Common Humanity? That's not where people are. And that's used religion. When I spent the summer in the Near East, I stayed for about a week and a half in Bethlehem, old little town of that one. And I lived in a bed and breakfast off of the student archaeological work, off of Manger Square. Doesn't that all sound so oh, that sounds so romantic. But I would go in the mornings down to the coffee shop, which was outside there on Manger Square at the time. And this is back in I can't remember, 77? No, 75. Oh, my. And there'd be a bunch of old guys hanging around every morning. They were like the old guys hang down at the coffee shop and they sit there and argue and just get along that way. That's kind of their way to do it. And there were a couple, there were like about 6 of them. There were a couple who were Palestinian Jews. There were a couple who were Palestinian Muslims. There was a Palestinian Christian. And there was an atheist who swore that the Palestinian Liberation Army, which was a secular organization, which was secular, and of course that means the U.S. will go in there and make sure it doesn't exist. Secularism is the answer. And they would argue and stuff. And they took me in as kind of the young graduate student. And they all shared the same concerns. And they blamed everything. And they said they hated it when people said, well, they've always been fighting here. They said, we have not. We've been getting along. Same customs, just different religions. You go to different places on different days. But what they shared was Palestinianism, the identity. And they blamed what was going on governments and on political use of religion. And we always got along. We never fought. It was like I said, I could go down to a local coffee shop here where the old boys gather. And these are the same sort of things. And that's one of the things they wanted to teach me. And I thought, those people, what they had in common was their area, was their identity of the area they lived in. They were Palestinians. And religion didn't divide them. They knew they were different. It wasn't that they were ignoring their religious differences, but that didn't divide them because they shared the same thing. And yet we have religion dividing us. I'll tell you another story. Have you got time for all my stories?
Absolutely.
This one took place in Taiwan. I lived there for a summer. I was there at Shirda, Taiwan Normal University, and I was there, and they supplied me with a graduate student in who's in education, get his master's degree in education, as my interpreter to go around with me. And so we traveled around, down south, Kaohsiung, and all kinds of places, and Tainan. At the end of it, he said, we should go. He was a thorough atheist. That was, strong atheist. I can't call myself an atheist because that's too certain, and I'm not certain about anything. But it's so he said, we should go to the church where my mom went to church. No, my temple, where my mom did bye-bye. That's what they call the worship they called the worship at a god there, or a Buddha, or whatever. And so we took the bus, and I just kind of wanted him to kind of see if he could understand his mother. I said, why did your mother take you there? And he was real little. She'd carry him by the hand. She'd go there. She'd do bye-bye and all that. And he said, I don't know. She was just superstitious. I said, well, maybe she was praying that this little boy she was holding the hand of will grow up someday and be a shurda, a lao shur, a respected teacher, and get his master's degree and pass his entrance exam, baccalaureate exams, and pass his entrance exams, and so on and so forth. Maybe she would do that, and that's where you are. And I wasn't trying to convince him of anything. I just was saying, your mother wasn't here. That's probably what your mother was praying about. That was what her concern was, as it is for every single person who goes to church until they get involved in the politics of it. Why do people pray about anything, anywhere? May my child grow up to do well. May they make a good marriage. May my grandmother who's dying pass well and be at peace. It's the same thing. What was funny then was, of course, as we went to the temple, I noticed for the first time in his life, he did his own bye-bye. He bought his own incense. He bought his own candle. He did his bye. And I wasn't trying to convince him of anything. Mm-hmm. I was just trying to say, understand your mother. And religion does not help us understand the humanity in other people so much. It fights that. It divides us. It does that kind of thing. And it keeps us from seeing our common humanity. Every mother around the world probably prays for the same thing when she goes to mosque or temple or shrine or something. And it's just the things it's their ultimate concerns, which are not. No. And so that's kind of where fundamentalist religion gets so tight on things like that, whether that's Hindu, Muslim, New Ageism, you can get fundamentalist New Ageism, whatever it is, and we miss our common humanity, and that's sad. That's very sad and tragic. Anyway, I'm over talking this, but I'm a professor. I can go on for 50 minutes.
So, go ahead, Stuart.
No, I have a question because I like you because you were mentioning how religion divides. One thing that I found fascinating in the United States, I grew up growing up Southern Baptist. So the Southern Baptists would look at charismatic and Pentecostals with ire. And look at these morons, these idiots. They don't listen to the Bible. They don't read this. We have the right one. But when it comes to nationalism, they're all under the same tent now. So it's been I found it bizarre that you see people that would be so staunchly conservative, but then also how they're like, oh no, these people that are weirdos and crazies that we've been calling out for years, no, they're part of us now. And is it just nationalism is a bigger tent, or how does that work? Yeah.
Well, look at how evangelicals, particularly white evangelicals, have treated Catholicism over the years.
Literally what I was going to bring up with J.D. Vance, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember books being written in the 50s and 60s called The Chaos of the Cults and The Kingdom of the Cults. And a chapter there was on Roman Catholicism, a chapter there was on Mormonism, a chapter there was on atheism, I think was considered a cult. All of a sudden they get along on the abortion issue. Now, certain people made that the issue, and certain leaders, and then that became the issue where they could galvanize around a common enemy. And, so for a while, they were at least politically aligned and ignoring the fact that most white evangelicals thought the Pope was the Antichrist or something like that. And then, of course, now we're getting around these other culture issues where they seem to have gotten along until we got a Chicago Pope, Chicago South Pi Pope. And Francis started that too, of course. But, white evangelicals are able to use Catholicism when it works for them. But when the Pope starts saying the things he's saying against MAGA and some things that seem just to me very humane.
Like be a person of peace. Yeah.
Yes, I know. He's for peace.
Yeah.
No, what a heretic.
If he's for peace, no, that just means he's pro nuclear weapon. That's what the Pope is, right? That's what we've told.
Yeah.
He's soft on crime. He's so soft on crime.
I'm not trying to. I mean, the Catholic Church has done some awful things. I'm not trying to say that. I mean, we get inquisitions and everything. Again, most of those, you look at it, it's sort of like the witchcraft trials in Salem and so on. You look at it and you see the politics behind it, and the often class warfare,
misogyny,
of the religious leaders, and you say, what?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Hey, Bob, one of your quotes is, this is what I remember anyhow. You said, religion doesn't do anything. And I also wanted to throw in that even the most hardline evangelicals and so on now are starting to use these kind of vague, simple studies that have been done, that there are parts of religion that are beneficial to you. You know, if you get a sense of community and those kind of things, that they're beneficial, and they use that as a marketing ploy. But then there's other things, or in your verbiage, the other ways that people use religion that are terribly detrimental. And so can you kind of sort those two sides out a little bit, or maybe somebody has a question they can ask in a better way?
Well, religion involves communities, but they're not always healthy communities, right?
Right, exactly.
They can be like opium dens, which feed you the drug. You all sit around there and enjoy it. You get high on Jesus, as they said in the 60s. And you feed each other into that. And there is no healing. There's nothing that, like those drugs, it covers up. It masquerades. It makes you something that gets you out of touch with what, let me call your humanity, and all that you would do differently if you didn't have that influence. So there are many of these, the community it can create can be a very unhealthy one that tells you how to feel as opposed to how you do feel. No, you shouldn't feel that way. You should feel this way, which is psychologically screwed up. We know that.
Yeah.
And it bases it on the idea that you're only lovable because somebody else loves you. It's different to have a theology that says God loves you because you are lovable, right? And another one that says you are lovable because God loves you. That second one is psychologically sick. We don't base on it, but that's what this version puts on the model of love in the universe. You know what I mean? And so there are some so it does create communities. They're not always healthy. That's one of the things I want to say, So, but we need community. On the other hand, we are communal people. It seems like, from what I see, we have to be with someone. But there are reasons to have community, and there are other reasons to have community. Am I in this community because it supports my addictions? Am I in this community because it supports my prejudices? Am I in this community because, or am I in this community because it makes me question, makes me learn about myself. It makes me see that I'm free to think. You know what I mean? So not all communities are good for you.
Yeah. Not all communities do that, JD, you got something out there? Welcome, by the way, from across the world.
Thank you. I don't have anything pertinent right now. Today's been a long day. It's currently 9:30 and I've been up since 5:30 a.m. So trying to get my brain in podcast mode.
Are you in Taipei, JD?
No, I'm actually in Kaohsiung.
On Kaohsiung, down south.
Yeah, the south is number one for me. It's so much more Taiwanese. Anyway, it's a whole different podcast we can do. I don't know.
I got a question, Bob. So, and tell me if this is uniquely a American or especially like American Christian issue. because what we kind of tend to see that like what we value in America is like you'd mentioned earlier, like church as a CEO corporate kind of style, and like that's how they like to grow. And so what pastoral has become in like the American context is you need to be like a CEO, like in a certain sense, almost like where the pulpit now attracts and rewards narcissistic behavior from a lot of individuals, and they seem to be the ones that are successful, et cetera, et cetera. Is this unique to us? Is it unique to Christianity? Is it unique to anything? Or do you see this across the board, too, that just people that are charismatic and shitty oftentimes like to run the roost?
Well, to me, there was a church historian where I got my PhD named Sidney Mead. He was called the Dean of American Church History. He happened to be, I think he was Unitarian. And he said once, America is the marketplace of soul. And that's something really important, because when religious ideas and things are taken to a culture, they absorb so much of the culture. And if you think, and that's what he was saying, Christianity in America, that is the dominant version, is different than the dominant version in Europe. And that's partly because we're a capitalist society. Mm-hmm. We're a society that thinks in terms of how many butts are in the pews on Sunday morning, how much money is coming in,
or sticking up in the air with all their glory. Right?
That's right, yeah. And then we look at Europe kind of Christianity and say, well, we need to send some missionaries there to get them back on the fold, which means get them very Americanized. Yeah. And I think it is. It's not that there aren't huge. Everywhere where capitalism dominates, you begin to get religious leaders thinking themselves as CEOs. We had a Unity Church here on the plaza in Kansas City, and the minister wanted to call himself the CEO. You know, it's like, okay, there you go. But I think it really is wherever capitalism, you begin to see those things being absorbed by the church, or the mosque, or the synagogue, and so on. You know, it's sort of like if you're going to be Jewish in the United States, you better do something about a minor Jewish holiday called Hanukkah, because we need to have something that competes with Christmas. And so it's a very capitalist thing that I think affects it. I think the dominant religion in any society, and anthropologists will tell you this all the time, is the one that supports the institutions of the society and the prejudices of the society. And when those institutions and prejudices change, eventually the religion catches up, and it changes too. The dominant one I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think it is something that we could say is basically American, but it's basically capitalist. Okay. And to the extent that happens, you know,
so how do people get to, like, because people always, like, they'll always claim, well, we have the true religion. We do it right. We do it, like, first century. We do it whatever. Mm-hmm. We're the OGs. We're all of this. But all of this is cultural, too, like you're mentioning. And so like, how do people get to how do you do that? What do you recommend?
Of course,
Bob?
You don't want to admit you have the false religion, so you've got to say yours is the true religion.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and then you need to spread it, because misery and lack of faith needs company. And since you don't believe really in the God you say you believe in, you don't think God can do anything, you got to do it yourself and make it safe. And maybe you'll get the government to do it for you, because God can't do it either. All of that sounds to me like unbelief. And it's the misery loves company, or whatever the word is instead of misery, that I think, you know, we got to get more people in the fold. And we got to get more people in. We've got to do this. We've got to do evangelism. And I think it comes out of a very lack of faith position. But it's very controlling, too, of course. It's part of what I call the user activities of religion. Mm-hmm. Are you doing enough evangelism? Well, you're having problems in your life. Well, you're reading the Bible more. Well, are you having problems like, are you praying enough? Well, are you having problems like, are you evangelizing? It's just another one. It's what it's what the addicts call user activities. It's how you get the high and keep it going, and do you have a good supplier? That's what you call a CEO in this kind of religion.
So I think about the word belief. So this is my assumption. This is the thing I've been wrestling around with for years. That when someone is invited into a religion or a belief system or a community, they very early want you to accept their beliefs, to agree. Either that's when you're a child being indoctrinated, or it's when you're recruited in as an adult or whatever. But pretty soon, you're going to have to say, they're going to say, this is exactly what we believe. Do you agree? Whether you're a child or you're uninformed, no matter where you come from, even if you're a college professor, they're going to ask you to agree or submit.
Unless you're emeritus.
And yeah, and then prove that by your devotion, but with your money, your volunteer
Time.
labor,
Yeah.
your devotion, your lack of resistance, your agreement to go along. And my assumption is that when you say I believe, then it's not just that your activities change, your brain stops. You don't critically think after that. I'm going to talk about in the next session about atrophy, about spiritual atrophy. My assumption is that most religions are full of people with spiritual atrophy. They claim this is a spiritual experience, but they're experiencing the same thing over and over again and hearing the same messages and agreeing to the same things and amening, and that's the high of righteousness that you talk about. Also, feel free to riff on that. But my assumption is that the word belief stops everything. It just stops critical thinking, it stops growth, it stops exploration, it stops discovery. None of that happens once you say, I believe, and I'm right, and God is on my side because I'm in the right group. Can you respond to that? That was a lot.
I think it's what they do with it, because there are things I believe, I believe my grandson's a good person. I believe, but it involves some, some evidence that kind of belief. But I just think that a lot of religious language is meant to stop discussion. And one of the base things is, are you an unbeliever? Do you really believe? All you have to do is ask questions like that in certain religious contexts. And don't you believe in God?
Gaslighting.
And I think that's meant
That
to
tone
stop
is so
discussion.
triggering.
Yeah, it's gaslighting.
It's a very protective language of the status quo to the person who's using it. And again, I think its effectiveness, its power is in the lack of belief behind those statements. But I've got to believe. I've got to believe. I've got to believe. And
Well, even
if I don't believe what is,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
no problem.
even like in deconstruction, rejecting evangelicalism, rejecting right-wing politics, and rejecting this, and now I get to hear where I have a different model of God. And so I'm going to start a website, and I'm going to start preaching again, and I'm going to start counseling people. But the same people, and I could name some names, but I don't really want to do that. But they just plant themselves in a different place and say, this is what we now believe. This is it. We found it again, right? Whether that's like perichoresis or, all the different theologies that we can come up with that's a little more left, that's a little more inclusive, which are good things, right? But then we just seem to want to find a place, which I know you call the high of righteousness, where we feel like we're on the right team. We got it figured out now again. We've got certainty again, right?
Well, to your point, also, Karl, I think when a lot of these people say believe, they're actually asking this. They're saying this is true. This is like objective truth. Like this is absolute truth. And once you do that, that starts affecting the worldview and how you even look at everything. If you're saying this is a law, this is a fact, this would be the same every day. And I think once you start telling people things like that, it does make them turn their brains off. Because how do I wait? How do I know this? How do I see this? No, I just have to trust and obey, which is also
no other way. To be happy in Jesus.
I know.
I think to both of your points too is like what Bob was saying is like it's all tied back to capitalism. Like it's like how can I get back into this like hustle culture of like making the money? Yeah. Like that's what it's about. It's like I don't really believe it, because if I did and I followed what Jesus said, I would just sell all my shit and like follow him. But like what it really is like how can I sell the next book? How can I sell blah blah blah? Like how can I monetize my shit? because that's the world we live in, especially today, with the awfulness of like the economy and like again the hustle culture that we live in, where it's just like everything has to be a hustle. It can't be like a hobby that you just do on your like in your own time. It has to be like you have to be hustling this thing. And again, the like butts and seats, like Bob was saying, like that means money in your pocket.
It's hard to get people to change. Well, Karl, you know this from the process of unlearning and deconstructing. It's hard to get people to change and to admit they got to turn around. You know, the old word repent, metanoia, means turn around. And we've turned it into all kinds of things that don't. No, that means change your whole way of looking. That's turn it around. It's hard to get people to do that when, one, their money's built on it, their ego is built on it, their reputation is built on it, their fandom is built on that. And you just go down the list of things and so you've got leaders who do that. And then everyday people, this is where their ego is. This is where their everything is. And again, it has nothing to do with doctrines and stuff. That's the frosting on it. It has to do with all that emotional stuff that's going on there. And I wrote in When Religion is Addiction, a chapter called the ultimate low self concept, which is when you have been told, and you're in a culture that has absorbed it, and I think the U.S. has absorbed this and some others because it's really good for capitalism. A kind of Augustinian view of things, that you're rotten to the core, and that why did that get adopted as the church back then? Well, of course, it meant that you need government to enforce laws for you, and so Constantine loved it. You know, they all loved it, the politician. And so here we've got this guy who was basically a Saint Augustine, who was basically a classic sexual addict by all definitions. And then and you read it, and he turns sex into the cause of evil. You're evil because someone had sex, and now you're born evil. And that's behind so much slight things we say. Like we say, well, nobody's perfect. Why do we say things like that? Well, it's true, whatever we mean by perfection. Maybe our problem is the definition of perfection, not that people don't meet up to it.
Yeah.
And so we have a culture which does that with children right from the beginning. Alice Miller, the famous European therapist, Karl, you and I have talked about this before. It's the poisonous pedagogy of children, that children are meant to be formed into something instead of. I learned so much from my grandson's way of seeing things growing up. He had the wisdom without the conditioning. You know, parenting seems to be, the sins of the fathers go on the kids. Well, that's because we push this conditioning down from one to the other. So I think a lot of it is tied to, we don't have good self-concepts. And therefore, the idea that you are basically rotten in some way, or there's nothing you can do in yourself to save yourself, or whatever that is, that ultimate bad self-concept affects all of us in some ways, culturally. And therefore, it also means that that's kind of why the fundamentalist view of what a human being is finds a warm spot inside us because of that kind of teaching. What Alice Miller calls poisonous pedagogy of parenthood. So I think there's that going on, enforcing this. And so in everyday people, you are fighting a cultural conditioning that, and of course, if someone says, well, I think we're basically all good, oh, that's New Ageism or something like that. It's marginalized in some way. It looks like too good. I'm not an optimist. I'm not an optimist at all. My favorite definition of the optimist is someone who fell off a 40-story building, and when he went by the 20th floor, someone heard him say, so far, so good. But it's I'm not a negative person. I'm not a pessimist either.
Right there.
Yeah. But and I choose hope. I choose hope. Hope is a choice. I know in a past podcast you were talking about hope. But to me, hope is a choice. Hopelessness is a feeling. but hope is a choice you choose to live all the time. And so, but I think we're really bound by religion that is just fits with our culture.
Yeah.
And of course capitalism. You'll be better if you make more money.
It's great advertising and marketing too. Yeah, you're insufficient, and you need the sauce we've got.
He must be a good guy. He's got a really good credit rating.
So you mentioned two organizations, PFLAG and the Fairness Project. Do you want to expand on those a little bit? What are those things?
Well, PFLAG is the oldest continuing LGBTQ plus rights organization in the world. And I like it because it is locally oriented. Everything that the national PFLAG does is to make the local chapters better. There are organizations of all kinds that their national goal seems to be to raise money and membership. So if you go to, when I speak at a national convention, I am there among a national organization whose goal is to make the local chapters better, because it's local where things happen. It's the local chapter leaders who are there, and they are talking to their neighbors and so on. So they've got to confront things. And so it's not something coming in from the outside in a sense, it's very anti-corporate. But it's and it's been working in sport groups for I don't know, since I can't remember when it first started, and it just I just identify with that a lot. And so it provides sport groups. There are local chapters all over. There are 400, I think, in the United States, and there are PFLAG chapters all over the world now, in most places. And I even met the head of PFLAG National for Uganda, where it's illegal to even say the word sex. And I just think, talk about someone doing work that's anti-cultural. And that's what it is. Parents, families, and friends of lesbian and gays, but they also support transgender and a lot of queer identities. And again, the Fairness Project is not an organization; it's a project. And when people, do we have anything that can help you? That's the thing. We're educational, and like I said, it's what sends me out for speaking. We produce booklets. I have short booklets like this 8-page one. There's a series on questions people ask. Like this one's called Case Closed, Responding to Psychological Arguments Against LGBT People. And this one's, I think, is the fun one, because can you believe it? 8 pages about how to be a parent. That takes, for me to write something like that, it takes, but they're meant to be really practical. They're point by point, they're things like that. There's a lot of hubris in thinking you can teach parenting in 8 pages, but they want it short. It's stuff that they can use. And so this is one that they'll use to take when they go, let's say, to argue why we should have a ban on conversion therapy for youth, and they'll leave it with, I've done it too, I've left it with lawmakers and stuff like that as something they can read. So that's kind of what that is. And, I said it's a losing proposition, but it helps all these organizations. And this is why I speak to groups that are so small, little local groups and stuff like that. And that's what the Fairness Project is about. Sometimes, an expert is someone from out of town. That's just, you could say the same things they said. And a lot of, I learned from Martin Luther King Jr., and he was accused of plagiarism because of this, that you have to tell people what they already know down deep, and then it gets to them. You go, aha, because it's what you needed to hear. One of the biggest pieces of advice I give people is whatever you do, if you're going to do it badly. Because perfectionism leads to procrastination, which leads to paralysis. So make mistakes, admit mistakes, don't deny them, be a model of how to clean up mistakes. Our country needs that, our world needs that, and just so little pieces of advice. So I don't ever say anything that probably people don't know already, and they're like, oh yeah.
Yeah. JD, you want to close this up? You got the final word?
I hope I haven't
did-
overtalked this whole
No.
situation.
No, this has been beautiful.
No.
It's been wonderful.
Great.
Why? Yeah, it's why you're here. I mean, I pretty much don't have a whole lot to add to that. I pretty much agree. I think one of the biggest things, and I've said this on the podcast numerous times, is I totally agree with Bob's point of like things have to, because I'm a sociology teacher and I'm a very, very much like a micro sociologist. Like I very much think that things should work from the ground up as opposed to from the top down. And so, yeah. But no, I didn't. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to prepare a statement for this or a closing remark. But yeah, I mean, I think Bob said it well enough. I don't need to add anything to that. I think it was beautifully said.